All right, let's get to the last movie in the trilogy, which is War for the Planet of the Apes. This one came out in 2017, is directed again by Matt Reeves, stars Andy Serkis, Woody Harrelson, Steve Zahn, Karen Conoval, Amaya Miller, Toby Kebbell, Judy Greer, and a few others. And the synopsis is: after the apes suffer unimaginable losses, Caesar wrestles with his darker instincts and begins his own mythic quest to avenge his kind. This movie, I don't want to repeat myself too much from Dawn. It is so much better than it needs to be. Like, this is basically almost an ape version of Apocalypse Now or something, or Platoon, where even like the opening sequence is so immediately engaging and compelling, where it's very quiet and you see the soldiers moving through the forest and they all have those names, like nicknames, written on their helmets. So that's very Platoon, Apocalypse Now-esque, and also Full Metal Jacket. I love that. And that teaser of the different titles like Rise, Dawn, War, and those lead-ins to the story, and that opening action sequence in general is one of the best of the whole franchise, with the ambush and then the apes eventually getting control over the battle and capturing that one survivor. And before that, the survivor calling Woody Harrelson and not getting any real response, essentially. And that conversation between him and Caesar about not wanting to start a war, about wanting to keep things as level-headed and separate as possible. Like, he's always trying to mediate. He's not Koba. He's always trying to find the most practical way forward. And that's such a great thing to have in a movie like this, where you're not seeing leaders as oftentimes it is nowadays, where you always have to make heroes really almost like anti-heroes or vigilantes or anything along those lines. He's very practical, very mature, very smart, very thoughtful and soft-spoken, yet still very confident, and will do what he needs to do. But it's such a well-written character. Cannot say enough about Caesar. Woody Harrelson's character is really a great part of the movie, and that's something similar to Koba, where you get an understanding of why he does what he does to a certain degree. He is still a little nuts, but the idea of his daughter dying and there being that forever sort of prejudice against the apes, the sequence where you first encounter him, where he kills Caesar's family, is really well done and really shocking and horrible, considering the emotional loss of Caesar, and that being a great motivation for what he does next. One of my favorite parts of the movie, and it's partially helped by the score, which Michael Giacchino's score this is probably one of his all-time best scores. It's really, really well done. It's shot by the guy who did Prisoner of Azkaban. It looks amazing. And Caesar's design, where he's getting a little bit older, a little bit grayer, a little bit more wrinkles, like, it's such a subtle design, but it's very, very well done. But the sequence where it's basically like the Great Escape, where they're planning that yet another escape from the compound, like they did in Rise, that's really well done in terms of the cleverness by the apes and the choreography and planning of all of that. That's very well done. The final action sequence where the other armies come in, like the helicopters are flying over, there's the avalanche. The action, as it should be obvious at this point, Matt Reeves clearly has incredible talent for great action, and that's the case with The Batman. If you haven't seen that yet, I highly would recommend it. One of his best movies as well. But his action isn't to just get the big explosions or to get some cool visuals. It's all leading to something, and he really picks his moments, like the scene with Caesar going into Woody Harrelson's room, and Harrelson has gotten the simian flu. That's a really powerful moment. The final moments of the movie, like the epilogue where Caesar dies, spoiler, it's a little long. I think the movie does suffer slightly from multiple ending disorder, as I call it. But at the same time, it is the end of a trilogy in a way, and you sort of need that, almost like how Lord of the Rings is. It goes on a little too long, yes, and yet it's still needs it in various ways, whether it's character, ideas, plot points. And so it is a long movie. I don't think I'm ever bored, and I don't think I'm ever checking my watch, but those final 15 minutes or so do feel the longest out of anything. Other than that, the character played by Steve Zahn, love him. Some people don't like him. I really like him, and I love Steve Zahn in general. And the young girl who has the simian flu who can't talk. Also, in terms of the direction, a very smart piece of direction is, unlike Dawn, which cuts back and forth between Caesar and the humans and Koba and all of them, for the most part, this entire movie is from the point of view of Caesar. So you're locked into how he's viewing this situation. It's not like spending an hour with Woody Harrelson, then an hour with Caesar. It's mostly just with Caesar through his singular troubles, whether it's something that he's dealing with on his own or like when he's captured and put in the pens, I guess you can call them, for lack of a better word. So I really like that piece, and that gives you a different viewpoint, obviously, but it also makes it set itself apart from Dawn and Rise, because each one really has its own sort of perspective on the situation. And this one, despite it being the biggest, the most grand, the most epic, it's at the same time probably the quietest out of any of them, despite it being called war. Like, it's oftentimes dialogue driven. And that's another point in Matt Reeves' favor, where he doesn't have to do that. And you wouldn't really expect that going in. You would think, all right, this is going to be all action, the most epic, which it is in some ways. And yet it's still very, very quiet and subtle and restrained. And I love that when it comes to blockbuster filmmaking, because that doesn't happen very often nowadays. One interesting perspective or injection of different sorts of characters within that world that's interesting is the apes who turned to work for the humans, whether it's out of fear or force or whatever it might be. Because then, of course, the apes who are with Caesar see him as a traitor. And then there's that conflict of, all right, he was with us at one point, but now, nope, we can't really trust him anymore. And the differing thoughts on who to trust, who not to trust. And to me, that does really speak to many modern conflicts, especially something like World War II, where, like, when the Nazis invaded Europe and there were people who were turning to work with the Nazis out of fear, or some of them were forced, or whatever it might be. And I think that feels very, I hate using the word timely, but like it has a lot of relevance and a lot of realism grounded to it in terms of how people react within a conflict. And the movie is really filled with so many of those ideas, and I love it for that. Also, one underlying idea or theme that I really connect with is the movie, both on the ape side and the human side, is characters really struggling with trying to find things that help them maintain a sense of comfort and to help keep them moving. And then when something disrupts that world or that comfort, and that in turn can cause people and apes to act out of fear, act very reactively rather than proactively. And I think that's a subtle part of the movie, but I think it's there. And that's something that has stuck with me more, and I feel it more and more when I watch it every time. So I would highly recommend you watch this if you have not seen it yet. There's so much to enjoy, so much to think about, both on the surface and underneath. And even just talking about it as an action movie, it's amazing. Even if it was an incredibly shallow movie, it would still be a great action film in that way and a good blockbuster. But there's way more going on than you would think. And I'm really hoping that Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, which is going to be a different director, I'm really hoping that it maintains at least a certain level of similar quality, because it's a high bar set by Matt Reeves. So I'm hoping Kingdom is up to snuff. Well, that one is a heavy 5 out of 5.